People have been asking me to make more N52 platform modification videos. Well, today I'm going to demonstrate one of the more beneficial ones. So today I'm going to show you how to trade in your 328 and buy a 335i instead. Just kidding. Today I'm going to be showing you how I swapped my rear differential to one with more aggressive gearing, which made a huge difference. This modification was about as significant as the 3-stage manifold was to me. And just like that mod, all the parts are OEM and can be found at your local junkyard for a couple $100 or less depending. But for all you sorry 335 owners out there who might be listening, who under no circumstances think that it's worthwhile modifying a 328,
more expensive to add power to the N52 than it is to just swap in an N54.
Let me remind you that a couple $100 is still cheaper than everything that you call basic maintenance. But you gotta pay if you want to play to go fast, am I right? I don't know. Too bad you can't fit a paint-matched bumper in your socks. Well, anyways, I'll use the price sheet from my local junkyard to kind of get a rough estimate on how much this will cost. You know, at least for us who will actually pay to play. This is the bare minimum of what it would cost to do this, but some extra things that you might want to consider is new differential fluid and maybe some new bushings. So, what is the idea behind all this? Or maybe you're asking, what even is a differential? Well, because I'm not a mechanical engineer, I'm going to be careful on not to say too much because I don't want to sound like an idiot. I don't know, but it takes the rotational energy from your engine and then redirects it two different ways which allow you to go forward and backwards. You might be wondering why it's not called the directional, but it's called the differential because this guy Tony Differenci realized that it's kind of ideal for the two axles to go different speeds, like when turning or etc. But basically there's a series of gears inside of this thing that allow it all to happen. It's all beyond my pay grade, but different vehicles come with different size gears or different gear ratios inside of these differentials, which means how many times the drive shaft needs to rotate for each turn of the wheels. Or for the layman like you and me, the higher the ratio, the more torque, more leverage, the more accelerate we will go. But at the cost of our top speed. Remember what I said about pay to play. But it shouldn't matter if you don't need to drive 900 miles an hour like on the Autobahn or the highways around Orlando. But depending which car you have and which differential you choose to put in, you're probably only going to lose about 10 to 20 miles an hour taking off your top speed. But I'm not going to do the math. So here's a little chart with all the differential gear ratios that come in 3 series. My car is a rear-wheel drive 325i with a manual transmission. So I have a 3.23 differential from the factory, and I decided to put in a 3.91, which came from an automatic X-Drive car, which now is probably a good time to mention that you can't really do this mod if you're an X-Drive car unless you disable the front drivetrain. Having the 2 sets of axles spinning at different speeds, I don't know, will probably blow up your transmission or something. Just consider this mod doesn't exactly apply to everybody. So anyways, I pretty much went with the steepest option possible, and let me tell you, it's kind of not for the faint of heart, because I think I sit at like 3,000 RPMs at highway speed when I'm in 6th gear, so I have to drive a little bit slower when I'm warming up the car, but it's a bit of a trade-off because the extra torque feels great. And I know all you damn hippies out there are probably suggesting that I do an LSD, but I don't do drugs. I didn't feel like spending the money to rebuild my differential. That's up to you. So now that I've showed you the differences between the differentials in the car, we need to talk about the differences in the drive shafts. As you may already know, the drive shafts that we have are 2-piece drive shafts, which means that the front of the drive shaft that hooks up to the transmission can be separated from the rear, which hooks up to the differential. Now listen closely, the front of the drive shaft that hooks up to the transmission is shorter on an automatic than it is on a manual transmission. However, the rear section has the same total length on all configurations, but has a different connection for all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive. Generally speaking, it seems that the cars with all-wheel drive systems use 3-bolt connections, whereas the rear-wheel drive use a 4-bolt connection. But there seems to be some weird exceptions, like sometimes the 330 differentials use a 3-bolt and sometimes they use a 4. So since the differentials that I was swapping use a different input, instead of converting the input of the differential, what I did was I used the front drive shaft that was already on my car and the rear section that had the 3-bolt connection. When you separate the two pieces, you'll realize that the splines are the same size. So putting together the two parts that I needed for my application I kind of created a hybrid drive shaft. This is somewhat of a common thing that E36, E46 guys have been doing for a while, but big shout out to Raymond for confirming to me that this is possible before I did it. Go subscribe to his channel. He's pretty much the Michael Jordan of N52 research and development. So without further ado, let's install it into my car. Attempting to do this without really touching the exhaust. For this one, on the driver's side, I just needed to put a bigger extension. It's probably like a 4-inch extension, and now I can fit my ratchet over here. Okay, so now there's 3 diff mounts. There's one here, which is on the back side of the car, and then there's one here, and then another one right there. It's probably the hardest one to reach. It's facing the same direction as the other front one, except there's a nut on the back of it for this exhaust hanger. It is also an 18. So after removing this exhaust hanger, you can actually see the threads, and they're still pretty frozen. So now that I can see them better, I'm going to spray the f*** out of them with PB Blaster, and hopefully they'll come undone. Okay, so that took a lot longer than it should have, and it's tough on that side because the e-brake cable is really in the way. Counter hold is wedged in there. It's so hard to do this one-handed. There she is. There she is. These things are fucking heavy, dude. So now that the diff is down, we can more easily get this section of the drive shaft down. And to do that, we need to access the center support bearing, because the center support bearing stays with the longer section, and the longer section is what we are swapping out. See that? This section is what's different on automatic and manual in terms of length, whereas this is always the same length, the back section, but the difference is the mounting to the differential. 3 fins, whereas the manual one has 4. To access the center support bearing, you need a T45 and a lot of patience, because to remove this plate, there is a very unnecessary amount of these. Okay, so once that is out of the way, you can pretty much slide the heat shields out of your way. Push it forward. Yep. And there we have it. There is the center support bearing. 14, and they should come out real easy. So once I get the 2 screws out, we're gonna separate the 2 halves, which also should be easy. Okay, and here's the second one. I should be able to separate the 2 parts with some help of getting this grease sleeve down. It should separate now. Pushing up on that. Now I can see. Okay. There it is. As you can see, these 2 are the same length. Now that the rear section of the drive shaft is separated, I can reinstall it just like how I disconnected the 2 that's already on the car. So, with my hybrid drive shaft put together, the reinstallation of the differential was pretty much the same. The only difference being the bolts that are used to connect the drive shaft to the differential. But despite these cars claiming the differentials have lifetime fluid, before I reinstalled it, I drained all the oil out, because there's only one drain and fill plug, and it's much easier just to flip it upside down than it is to siphon it out. So after that, I put it back into the car and topped it off to begin its second lifetime. Initially, before I started this project, I bought some brand new white line upgraded bushings, or mounts, whatever you want to call them. That was before I realized that they're press fit into the subframe, and once I saw that, I said fuck that. So if any of you guys want to buy these upgraded white line differential bushings, send me a message on Instagram or something. So in conclusion, what are my thoughts on this project? So you can't tell, but this was filmed over a year ago. So I've had a lot of time to test this, and I gotta say it's one of the best mods that I've done to the car so far. As I said in the beginning, it made a huge difference to the driving experience. There's much more usable torque on the highway for passing in scenarios like that, and you barely have to even downshift. And wide open throttle, revving out all the gears, the car feels quite a bit peppier. The only thing to get used to is if you're on a manual car like me. I used to get a little bit confused skipping gears downshifting because the RPMs are in a totally different range. Because for example, third is what second used to be basically, and second is what first used to be, and so on. So for example, when you make a 90-degree turn like at an intersection or turning into your driveway or something, you can totally get away with shifting just into third instead of second. And like I said, your RPMs sit way higher. You notice it the most just kind of cruising on the highway. Subconsciously you think you gotta upshift, but there's no gears left. But funny enough, I don't think it really affected my fuel economy at all. Not that you should really care about that sort of thing when you're doing mods like this. So in conclusion, I'm very happy with this modification. It makes the 750 stock wheel horsepower of the N52 feel way better utilized. So thanks for watching. I hope this video helped you in some way or another. Subscribe to my channel, 335i. Here's some clips from driving.